Our next guest speaker for this session is our very own Dr. Omonike Olaleye. She is an amazing mentor. She is also the principal investigator for this grant. So she will be talking to us over preclinical trials and the first 4 phases of clinical trials. Dr. Olaleye is a professor of pharmacology and the interim associate provost and associate vice president for research at Texas Southern University. She is the principal investigator of TSU's Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research, CBMHR, which the Community Engagement Core is under. And in addition to this, Dr. Olaleye is TSU's Program Director for ASA-funded Maternal and Child Health Student Training Program for Academic Readiness and Success. She is also the co-director of Education Training and Community Outreach of the Gulf Coast Consortia Center for Comprehensive Pharmacokinetic, Pharmacodynamics, and Formulation. She has extensive expertise in drug discovery and development, research spanning more than 20 years working in major pharmaceutical companies and academia. Without further ado, to our amazing audience, I know we're all, clapping, even though I cannot hear you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Olaleye. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajewole, for that kind introduction. Thank you for you and your team for hosting this historic conference at Texas Southern University. We're really blessed to have you to host this. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists and speakers. I look forward to this conference. And I will go ahead and share my slides now. Thank you. Can you see my slides well?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you so much.
Sure. So today I'll be talking to you about preclinical drug development and the 4 phases of clinical trials. And it's been such a pleasure to do part of this work also at Texas Southern University. So my outline will be mainly focused on 2 major areas: preclinical drug development and the 4 phases. However, I'll give you some examples that we have here from Texas Southern University from some of our great team here. The road to drug development is such a long journey, but it can be very fruitful and satisfying, especially if we're able to take a single drug all the way from the basic science research into the clinic. So it starts with a great team of people, very multidisciplinary team of people that includes scientists, pharmacologists, pharmacists, medical doctors, nurses, and even the community coming together to talk about health concerns and looking at specific diseases that they're trying to address. And then we then come up with specific compounds or small molecules in the case of drug discovery, where we look how these compounds can target a specific disease. And to do this, we use what we call a high throughput screening robot, and we can screen thousands and sometimes millions of compounds during this process. And when we do that, we narrow down to a few compounds, and we take this through a rigorous process of what we call preclinical drug development in animal studies before we go all the way to humans. So it's a very long journey, and I'll walk you through this process today. First, when we get to phase 1, studies in healthy volunteers, then phase 2 in patients that have the disease that we're trying to address, and then phase 3, where we do a larger validation of efficacy and safety, and then all the way to FDA approval. And I just wanted to stop here to say, we've come a very long way. This story here is a penicillin story from the discovery of Sir Alexander Fleming and his colleagues. And they were awarded the Nobel Prize in 1945 for the identification of penicillin. This is what we call the miracle drugs, but interestingly, this was actually accidental discovery. So most of the stories I'll be telling you today will be more of a methodological way by which we discover drugs and walk all the way to clinical trials. And like Dr. Shodaka said, making sure that these trials in human beings are done ethically. So just to show you here that the process involves a very large team, starting from even the governmental agencies that regulate and fund some of the trials, also the clinical trial sponsors, the drug companies, a lot of the large drug companies that are the clinical trial sponsors. And also we have the Food and Drug Administration of the US that would review and approve the drugs through that process. And also, I just wanted to showcase here some of our labs here at Texas Southern University, where we do also do drug discovery and development. And of course, we have to have the clinical trial team. And this is, again, a large team involving not just the drug companies or the academic institutions, but also clinical research organizations. And all this process involves this team, funding, and people, and before going all the way to commercialization and marketing. And this is just to show you again that it takes a lot of people to do this. It's just not a one-man show, and we need a lot of expertise. And I just want to give you a brief overview of the timeline. It takes close to 20 years to go all the way from a discovery of a potential drug. In this case, I'm talking mostly about drugs, but it could be a procedure, it could be a device, it could be a test, all the way from discovery in the basic biomedical sciences to phase 4. So you have about 19 years for the drug companies. They look at their patent protection. It takes about 12 years to reach market, and they have about 7 years of exclusive marketing for profit. But I have to stop here and share this quote with you from Judge Merck, where it says, we have to remember, we can never forget that the medicine is for the people. It's not for profit. And if we do our job well, the rewards will come, but it is for the people. And so this brings, again, linking back to what Dr. Shodeke mentioned about conducting clinical trials in an ethical manner. So the scientists have to know this also from the beginning. It's not just something we address during clinical trials, it's things we do from preclinical trial phase of this. So in the drug discovery, we screen thousands of compounds, like I said, in some cases, millions of compounds, and we narrow down to about a few hundreds, and a few by the time we get into clinical trials after the IND is submitted for first in human testing. And as you see shortly, we have 4 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and they all have different purposes. And then you have the NDA that is submitted, and all the way to the Food and Drug review and approval. So it's a very lengthy and costly process. Could take about 2.6 billion on the average to get a drug from the bench all the way to market. And then we have phase 4, where we do what we call post-marketing surveillance. This is a commitment to ensure that there's continued monitoring of safety in the population. And I just wanted to show this briefly. I won't spend time on it. It's just a research and development report from JAMA showing that it takes a lot to bring compounds from the bench to the market. And a lot of the drug companies have to invest a lot of money, but if it's fruitful, they do get rewarded out of it. So moving on now, the first phase is the preclinical drug discovery. And in this phase, we start, like I said, with several compounds, hundreds of compounds. And this is a very good example of some of the work that even we're doing in our infectious disease lab here at Texas Southern University. We're very proud. We have about 16 projects that are very active in our lab. We have several graduate students. Here is Collins, Mamber, and Tolu in my lab. And we start all the way from identify a potential drug target. And in this case, for infectious diseases, we walk it all the way from the genomic level to the biochemical level, structural level. And the idea is to better understand this drug target. And when we better understand it, then we can screen compounds against it to identify what we call all the way a lead series compound that's promising, that could now go into animals and eventually into humans. So I just wanted to give you this big overview of what we have, the type of infrastructure we have here at CSU. This is one example of how we took one drug that was identified from inhibiting a specific target that's important for tuberculosis, the lung disease. And we've been able to take over 175,000 compounds, narrow down to 21, and eventually narrow down to about 5 compounds that we're looking at, not just for treatment of TB, but now also looking at for treatment of patients that have tuberculosis and HIV. So we've done a lot of this work. We continue to pursue it to be able to bring a compound to the market. Secondly, in the next phase of our preclinical drug development, this is where we now interrogate the compounds we have identified closely in animal models before we actually get into humans. So in this animal studies, we look at the dose response, the mechanism of action, which is how does the drug work in the body? How exactly is it working? The duration of effect, reversibility. We also look at potential for off target. So, we have hundreds and thousands of genes, and we know that drugs can have off target. So we interrogate and make sure to reduce toxicity, to specifically know that our compounds are selectively toxic to the target versus any other target. So we also look at pharmacokinetics in different animal species before we go into humans. And we also look at the absorption, the distribution, the metabolism, the excretion of the drug. We also want to look at for potential for species-specific activity. Then we go ahead to look at the various toxicology studies. We do acute toxicity, immunotoxicity, carcinotoxicity, reproductive toxicity studies, all of this in animal. And then we have enough sufficient preclinical data to now start interrogating some more assays, which are the methods by which we test this before we go first in human. And I just wanted to show you on the right hand here, this is a big infrastructure we have here funded by the state of Texas at Texas University's CPRIT grant. Is the Gulf Coast Center for Comprehensive PK/PD and Formulation. The government gave TSU this money to help people that have identified anti-cancer agents to move their drug from the bench all the way to drug development phase. So we do have this robust infrastructure here at Texas University. This is some of our labs. I'm just highlighting 2 of the labs here of my colleagues, Dr. Dong Liang and Dr. Wan Shea in the preclinical development lab. So we have a very good niche here. We're next to the largest medical center in the world, and it just turns out that at TSU we have this great expertise to be able to take compounds from the bench all the way to the clinic. And this is very key because now when we have this expertise in TSU, where we're one of the largest historically Black colleges in the country, and we serve Harris County, which is one of the 3rd largest counties in the nation, we need to be vested and make sure that we have the healthcare workforce, the biomedical workforce that are actually looking at discovering this compound, so that we're really vested in as we look at diseases that disproportionately impact minority populations. So this is a very strategic role that Texas Southern University is playing. So now we're moving to the phase of clinical trials, and you have to have what we call a clinical protocol. It's a detailed plan of the purpose of the study, and because of time, I'm going to move quickly. Clinical trials, as you heard from Dr. Shodeke, are very highly regulated, and that's very important because now you're talking about testing these compounds in human beings. So we have the training requirements. The Office of Clinical Research at NIH provides clinical research training. Dr. Shodeke mentioned about informed consent, which is a process in which you educate the patient about the risk and benefits and alternatives for the proposed intervention, procedure, or drug. We also have the Internal Review Board, which ensures that this research is done ethically. So all of this have to be done before the research actually takes place. We have the case report form, we have the clinical trial materials, we have to report all the adverse events, and these are also monitored by several regulatory bodies, including the FDA. So for phase 1 study, it's the one we called saying that it's a lot of fun, a lot of college students participate in this. It's for healthy volunteers. And the goal of the phase 1 study is to evaluate the safety of this drug first in human, in healthy volunteers. So the duration can be a week to several months. We usually like to start with a single dose study. We also do a food effect study. We do the dose proportionality study, a mass balance study, several studies. And the idea here is to better understand this drug in terms of the safety. We want to evaluate the safety of this drug first in this phase 1 study. And about 70% of drugs from this phase, according to the FDA, move on to the next phase. And then in phase 2 studies, this is where we want to really ask the question, is this drug effective? What is the efficacy of this drug? We look at the dose efficacy relationship, the therapeutic dose regimen. We also look at the duration of therapy. We design different types of phase 2 studies. This is a study where we look at it first in the patients for the disease of study. And here there are different study design. Time will not permit me to go into the detail of the different study design. We have the randomized study design, open label versus blind. We also have, we can run parallel studies or crossover studies. And in the open label study, everyone knows what, medication they're taking, who's taking the medication.
Dr. Olaleye, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Then we have the single blind study where a patient doesn't know whether he or she's taking a test drug or placebo, and then we have the double blind. So at this time, about 33% of drugs that successfully go through this phase will move to the next phase, which is phase 3. So in the phase 3 studies, now we have victory inside. We're usually looking for victory inside. These are larger multi-center, multi-site studies where we're looking at the safety and efficacy of this drug now in a larger population at different hospitals. And this can take 1 to 4 years. And now it's, again, like I said, it's a very costly process. And we go all the way from preclinical again to get to phase 3. And I mentioned earlier that it takes about $2.6 billion on the average per drug approval. So here now we have a larger population. And then in the phase 4 studies, like I mentioned earlier, this is a commitment study by the company, the sponsor, to say, hey, we want to look at the post-marketing surveillance, pharmacovigilance surveillance. We want to look at pharmacoepidemiology of this drug now that's being monitored. And it's to ensure that the drug is safe and it's effective in a heterogeneous patient population. So here we look at several thousands of people, and it can take a year to or more. And this is just an example. Time will not permit me. You can go later to look at it. A situation, an unfortunate story that happened with Vioxx several years ago, where this information came out about the cardiovascular problems was seen heightened at the phase 4 post-marketing study. And this was a very big issue during that time. And I just wanted to highlight lastly that even here at Texas Southern University, we recently collaborated with our colleagues at Emory University on, we identified about 5 potential compounds targeting SARS-CoV-2, specifically looking at the prophylactic pathway, the entry pathway, and also potential treatment pathway. And we're working with the NIAID to look at funding a phase 2 study. So we're very excited about this. This is coming out of my lab and collaborating with my colleagues, Dr. Liang, Dr. J, Dr. Ajewale, to move this into phase 2 studies for some of the drugs that we're repurposing. So these are existing drugs, but repurposing for treatment of COVID-19. So thank you so much. We're so blessed for TSU to play this strategic role during this time in our nation. I would like to say a big thank you to NIH and IMHD for funding all our studies and also this initiative. A big thank you to Dr. Veronica Ajewale